by chocolate vending machines. Italian prosecutors believe pizza in Naples may be baked in ovens lit with wood from coffins dug up from the local cemetery. Yuck. Investigators in Naples suspect thousands of small, lower-end pizza shops and bakeries may be using wood from caskets to keep the ovens burning. Naples' graveyard has long been hunting grounds for thieves. Last year, 5,000 flower pots were stolen from the cemetery. And our feature story at coasttocoastam.com, go take a look. Our United Kingdom aquarium is celebrating after successfully breeding one of the most dangerous amphibians on Earth. Why they would celebrate is beyond me. It's called the phantasmal poison frog. It can kill anyone who merely touches it. They've got skin 200 times more toxic than morphine. The frogs are found on the western slopes of the Andes in Ecuador and South America. They are so rare that they are in danger of becoming extinct. 26 of them born now at this UK aquarium. That's why they're happy. But, man, stay away from those. Up next, Claude Swanson joins us. Life Force, the scientific basis, as we talk about consciousness and scientific evidence for the paranormal and the unusual. That's next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast Life Force, the scientific basis. Claude Swanson's work, MIT and Princeton educated physicist. He has worked as a conventional applied physicist for more than 20 years. He has conducted extensive research into the physics of the paranormal. Now, this research has involved scientific measurements in haunted houses, experiments in remote viewing and psychokinesis, and testing of new devices which can measure these very strange forces. Claude was on with me back in June of 2008 as we talked about the synchronized universe, and here he is again on Coast to Coast AM. Claude, how are you?
I'm doing great, George. Great to be back.
Likewise. Looking forward to this tonight. I always enjoy talking to you. You open up our minds. You know?
Well, thank you. You have over the years, too, so we're all very grateful to you, George.
Tell me a little bit about you. You know, you were on with me back in 2008. A lot of new listeners have popped in since then. Tell us a little bit about your background and current projects you've been working on.
Sure. I started out as a, sort of a naive, credulous scientist, like so many, and believing what I was being taught in the school, and that's what I went through the whole MIT, Princeton, and graduate school and postgraduate work. And somewhere along the lines, after that, I began hearing rumors about remote viewing, and that was what was my first clue that something was missing in my conventional scientific education. And once I began digging into it, I found more and more things that were strange, that did not quite fit the paradigm that I'd been taught in school. And I tend to be very thorough when I go about these things. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of surprising to find out that so many of the beliefs that we are taught in our Western scientific education are missing pieces. And part of it is that our scientists don't really look in the strange places. We set up laboratory experiments that are, based on certain conditions. But if we go into a strange place like a haunted house, oftentimes energies are encountered that don't fit our current theories, and that was what was exciting to me. Today, I've just finished the second book, The Life Force, which tries to put a sort of scientific basis underneath of paranormal phenomena to explain how these things happen.
Our mailroom, by the way, needed a crane to bring it up to me in my office. Whoa, did you put some work into that one?
I did not intend the book to be so big, believe me. When I started this book to be volume 2 after the first one came out in 2003, and I thought, well, it'll take a couple of years and be just a snap. I thought I knew most of what had to be done, and what I discovered as I began delving into it is this has been a very, very active time for discovery in our sciences, especially in the forefront and the border area sciences. And so many things have been figured out in the past 10 or 15 years that that all play into how the paranormal works and how these extraordinary energies work. And what I ended up with, without expecting it, was an understanding of life. And I almost called the book The Secret of Life. I thought that was too presumptuous, but it's kind of how it feels, because what we end up with now, for the first time maybe, is a comprehensive understanding and description of what makes a living being, even in part the spiritual interactions. And so I could talk about that later, but
Sure.
I had not expected this was going to go so far, and I kept wanting it to be over and me to be able to say the end, but it just took this long.
Do you find yourself going against the grain, against the scientific grain?
Well, yes, but there are amazing scientists around the world who are going the same direction I am. And I think the real difficulty is that, particularly in America, we don't hear enough about that work. In this book, for example, I talk about the Russian torsion work, which started in the 50s. It got government support for 30 years. We wouldn't know about it except for glasnost and perestroika when it all came out in the early 90s. But in America, there's very little that's talked about it, even though that's kind of becoming a more or less standard science over there. In the same way, acupuncture, of course, is natural for Oriental doctors.
Sure.
But in this country, it's only the past 20 or 30 years, and still it's pushed off to the side as a marginalized alternative medicine. But
well, we're going to take this quick break, Claude. Come right back with you. Full program with Claude Swanson tonight on Coast to Coast AM. Well, if you're not a member of Streamlink yet, you can be for just pennies a day and get downloads, past archives, iPhone apps, and just have some fun. Just go to coasttocoastam.com, and down there you can sign up for Streamlink. And welcome back. We're with Dr. Claude Swanson. His website's linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Claude, when you wrote The Synchronized Universe, why did you call it that?
It's basically from a physics model. I tried to understand how it could possibly be that these strange things happen. How is it possible that certain healers and certain psychics can walk through walls? I know some of these things may sound strange to people, but in China there are experiments with experts who are very adept at causing objects to go through walls. We know the Philippine healers. Some of them, of course, may be fooling people with chicken gizzards, but there are some very well documented cases where people in trance state are able to pass their hands through solid objects. So we have lots of solid cases like that, and the problem is, how can you explain it? So if you go over the wide range of psychic phenomena, it comes to the conclusion that matter is not the solid stuff that we're used to thinking about. It's not billiard balls. Most of the atom is empty, and the particles are very tiny, and they're wiggling around in a huge space, and it's really what is it that makes an atom seem solid, and that's where the synchronized universe idea came from, that if particles only interact when their motions at the smallest scales are synchronized with each other, that would explain how it is that these objects can seem solid, and yet it's possible to turn off those forces by shifting the frequency or shifting the phase. And if you can do that, then you can have many parallel universes all in the same place because they have different frequencies. It ends up explaining a lot of the things that are seen in the paranormal.
How did these practitioners, Claude, pick up on this? I mean, how did they know? And there are a number of people out there. We'll talk about a few of them later on specifically. But how did they learn this?
I think that our consciousness also perceives the outside world by synchronization. I think that when we are born, when we grow up and become acclimatized to what we call reality, that our consciousness becomes synchronized with the material world around us as part of that process. And so it's kind of built in and instinctive. And most of us say, well, we can't change the physical reality because we're so used to staying synchronized with the matter that we deal with, the forces, etc. But there are some people, and shaman, yogis, certain extraordinary people who have learned how to control their state of consciousness, who seem to be able to shift realities. They can walk through walls. They can teleport. They can do all kinds of things. And these unusual people are well documented at this point. And it seems to be control of how the mind focuses and synchronizes with the external reality that seems to be the key. So I think that it's partly built into our system, but through training, it's possible to unlearn it and to learn how to control that focus process. And that's part of what the second book talks about, because I mentioned quantum consciousness, the understanding of what is consciousness. And I think that the way the mind synchronizes with external reality is a big part of consciousness.
Are you convinced, Dr. Claude Swanson, that psychokinesis, levitation, teleportation, OBEs, all of this is beyond a shadow of a doubt real? It happens?
Yes. Yes, I am. There's enormous amounts of evidence for all of these things. And, of course, in each case, you have to go dig. You won't find the best evidence laid out in the public media, unfortunately.
No.
I wrote my book as a way to try to pull together best evidence to show that there is very solid evidence. For example, the Princeton Pear Lab worked for 30 years and more collecting data on psychokinesis, the ability of people to affect objects at a distance. Likewise, on ESP and remote viewing, they did similar amounts of work. Over the cumulative effect of all their data over 30-some years is now 35 trillion to 1 odds against chance that these things are real.
On the face of it, I'm going to tell you a quick story. Both of us would say, nah, come on, didn't happen. But there was such a conviction in this person's voice when he called me a couple of years ago that he was driving, and for whatever reason, it looked like he was going to go head-on into another oncoming car. 50, 60 miles an hour. At that rate, you're dead when you do a head-on collision, because that's like 100 or 120 miles an hour when you both hit. Mm-hmm. And he said, George, there was no way I was going to be able to steer my way out of it. I was trapped on the left, and there was a truck on the right, and I was stuck. And this car was coming right at me. Now, this is where initially we'd say, these things don't happen. They can't happen. He said, seconds before I was going to collide with this other car, less than that, I looked at the eyes of the other person in the other car who had this look of panic on his face, as he should. Mm-hmm. And he said, and I did too, and I just braced myself, closed my eyes. I knew it was all over. He did too. And he said, it never happened. He said, I came, my eyes opened. I had gone through the car. Mm-hmm. He had gone through mine without one